We'll be talking about escrow in this video, what the difference is between a transactional escrow and a mortgage escrow. So that way, when you hear your agent say, hey, let's open escrow, you know exactly what they are talking about. Let's dive right into it. So, what is a escrow during transaction? Now, I'm going to divide this into two main areas. One is going to be the transaction escrow, and then the other is going to be the mortgage escrow. These are two very different things, and I'll be kind of covering them as needed. So, first thing is going to be the transaction escrow. This is going to be an escrow account or a neutral third party account that is opened during the transaction. This account will be opened until the end of the transaction, which again, depending on how long that is, could be anywhere between 30 days, could be as long as 90 days. So just one of those things to kind of keep in mind, that once the transaction closes, that escrow account then closes as well. And when the transaction starts, the escrow is then opened then as well. This is one of those things where escrow is going to be a bank account or an account that will make sure to have the funds go in there for both the seller and the buyer, and then is distributed from that third account. So one of those things, when you get your mortgage, that mortgage or the money for that mortgage will then be funded into that escrow account and then distributed to the sellers. Now, I'll be diving into a little bit more into this later on in the video, but this brings us to the second type of escrow, which is a mortgage escrow. This is typically a third-party account where you're going to be putting in your PITI. This is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. This is one of those things that is typically done after the transaction and is a account where you are putting in that PITI payment, and is something where you're paying that annually or monthly, and then when it becomes something where taxes are due for property taxes, then that escrow company will then distribute those. Sometimes this is mixed in with the mortgage servicer, so just kind of keep in mind that sometimes they are interchangeable, or you may have one or the other. So keep that in mind when we're moving forward into that. So diving a little bit more into the transaction escrow, this is one of those things that when a agent mentions that they're opening escrow, it's typically something that they will do once the offer is accepted. Now, this is something that is done both by the listing agent and by the buyer's agent. So just kind of keep in mind that this is not something that you're really in charge of. However, this is one of those things that once that escrow account is opened, you'll then be able to, as a buyer, put in the earnest money to that account. And typically that is going to be due within 3 business days of an accepted offer. So for example, if you were to get an accepted offer on Saturday, then you have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to finally give that earnest money. There's a variety of different ways, and I have a different video that goes all over earnest money. I'll make sure to leave that in the comments down below or in the description down below. So the escrow company is also sometimes known as a title company as well. And this is one of those things where they are somewhat interchangeable in Oregon. However, in different states, that might be a different thing as well. So just know that in Oregon, typically you're going to see a escrow and title company kind of be interchangeable, and note that the title portion of it is mostly towards the title of the property. Escrow is more for the accounts and making sure that everything is distributed properly and the contract is followed more properly. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking of the difference between escrow and title, and typically they're synonymous here in the Portland metro area as well. A common question that is asked by a lot of buyers is, can you lose earnest money to escrow? And escrow can't actually hold those funds. So when you deposit that earnest money, it's something where they will want to get rid of it or move it outside of them as soon as possible, especially if the transaction terminates. So the answer to this question is it kind of depends. So in many scenarios, the buyer is heavily protected with the purchase sale agreement. Again, that might change, and depending on what is going on, the seller might be entitled to that earnest money. So with that, just note that as long as you're within those contingencies as a buyer, that money will get directed back to you. However, if you say are past the inspection period, and then the reason for you canceling the transaction is something that is more geared towards the inspection period, just know that that is not something that you'd be able to get your earnest money back on. So there are a couple scenarios that if you want to talk a little bit further or have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. My contact information is down below, and feel free to comment as well. If you find any of this content helpful as well, it'd be great if you could hit that like button and subscribe as well. So this would be an instance of how does the escrow company protect the buyer. So based off of the contract, if the contract states that the earnest money is then deserved to go to the buyer, then from there, they would be able to distribute the funds back to the buyer. Now, how does that earnest money come back? Now, this is something that kind of varies from place to place, but typically it will be about 3 to 5 business days to get back to you, whether that be through a check, a wire back, or some other combination of that. Just note that when you are looking at getting that earnest money back and it's through a check, make sure that you know whose name should be on that check as well. For example, if you are a couple and the one partner out of that couple paid for that check and now they need to get that check back, it would be a good idea to note to the company or the title company or escrow company to say, hey, please have this written on the check. That way it just makes things a little bit easier and you're not having to have both signatures on the check in order to cash it back or put it back into your account. So now that we've covered the transaction escrow, we'll be diving a little bit more into the mortgage escrow. Now, this is something that you're going to have a little bit more of a conversation with your lender about, but just something to keep in mind. This is where you're going to be putting in a monthly payment for your PITI, which is the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Think of this as a monthly piggy bank that you're putting in for those yearly taxes or yearly insurance, where the escrow company will then be able to pay for the taxes and insurance in a lump sum annually. Mortgage escrow is something that the lender will typically create and then also give you more detailed instructions. So if you have more questions about that and where to pay, things of that nature, feel free to reach out to your lender. And this is something that's typically required for a lot of people who are paying less than 20% of the purchase price or having less than 20% for the down payment. So just something to know when you are buying a place that you'll most likely have a mortgage escrow. If you found any of this content helpful, it would be great if you could hit that like button and also subscribe. If you have further questions, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'd be more than happy to answer. I also have my contact information as well. Thank you so much for your time and thanks for watching.